I'd like to turn to the book of Acts, chapter 12. We'll read the first 18 verses. Acts, chapter 12. Now about that time, Herod the king stretched forth his hands to vex certain of the church. And he killed James, the brother of John, with the sword. And because he saw it pleased the Jews, he proceeded further to take Peter also. Then were the days of unleavened bread. And when he had apprehended him, that is, when he had laid hands upon Peter, he put him in prison, and delivered him to 4 quaternions of soldiers to keep him, intending after Easter to bring him forth to the people. Peter therefore was kept in prison, but prayer was made without ceasing of the church unto God for him. And when Herod would have brought him forth, the same night Peter was sleeping between 2 soldiers, bound with 2 chains, and the keepers before the door kept the prison. And behold, the angel of the Lord came upon him, that is Peter, and a light shined in the prison, and he smote Peter on the side, and raised him up, saying, Arise up quickly. And his chains fell off from his hands. And the angel said unto him, Gird thyself, and bind on thy sandals. And so he did. And he saith unto him, Cast thy garment about thee, and follow me. And he went out and followed him, and wist not that it was true which was done by the angel, but thought he saw a vision. When they were past the first and the second ward, they came unto the iron gate that leadeth into the city, which opened to them of his own accord, and they went out, and passed on through one street, and forthwith the angel departed from him. And when Peter was come to himself, he saith, Now I know of a surety that the Lord hath sent his angel, and hath delivered me out of the hand of Herod, and from all the expectation of the people of the Jews. And when he had considered the thing, he came to the house of Mary, the mother of John, whose surname was Mark, where many were gathered together, praying. And as Peter knocked at the door of the gate, a damsel came to hearken, named Rhoda. And when she knew Peter's voice, she opened not the gate for gladness, but ran in and told how Peter stood before the gate. And they said unto her, Thou art mad. But she constantly affirmed that it was even so. Then said they, It is his angel, or his spirit. But Peter continued knocking, and when they had opened the door and saw him, they were astonished. But he, beckoning unto them with the hand to hold their peace, declared unto them how that the Lord had brought him out of the prison. And he said, Go show these things unto James and to the brethren. And he departed and went into another place. Now as soon as it was day, there was no small stir among the soldiers what was become of Peter. What is recorded here is of great a source of great encouragement, a source of strength and hope for every child of God. We see here displayed the power, the ability, the control, the authority of the Lord. We see here the church banding together in prayer. And throughout there's much encouragement to pray. And that's our subject. Encouragement to relentless praying. When reading this passage of Scripture, much is usually made of the fact that when the prayer was answered, they were astonished beyond belief, verses 13 through 16. And people dwell on what they perceive here as their lack of faith. But I think they're dwelling upon the wrong thing. We need to dwell upon the fact that what is recorded here is a manifestation, an illustration of what Paul wrote in Ephesians 3:20. Now unto him that is able to do, capable of doing, exceeding, that is greater than surpassing, abundantly, overflowing, above, beyond all that we ask or think. That's what's being illustrated here in Acts chapter 12. God has the capability, the wherewithal, to act in such a way that surpasses, goes beyond anything that we could even ever think of asking. And our text is an illustration of that fact. We pray that as we look at this, that we would be encouraged, challenged to relentless praying. Praying without stopping. I believe that that is a great fault, a great failure of all of us. We stop praying for things too soon. Too soon. And I believe this passage teaches us to pray relentlessly. So let's consider first of all the circumstances, what the church did under the circumstances. First of all, the circumstances, it was a time of evil intent toward the Lord's church. We read in verse 1 that Herod the king, that's the government, Herod the king stretched forth his hands. That's figurative expression of his intent to vex. To vex. Herod the king stretched forth his hands to torment, to trouble, to distress, to injure, to do evil to certain of the church. So the king, the government, had evil intentions toward the church of the Lord Jesus Christ. It was a time when the enemy was bent on destroying the Lord's church. Also, it was a time of hatred and malice toward the Lord's church, toward the Lord's people, toward the truth that they preached, toward the Christ that they represented. We read in verse 2 that Herod the king, now he's already killed James, the brother of John, with the sword. Death by the sword was one of the most disgraceful ways that a Jew could die, because it was inflicted upon those who were thought to be deceivers. This reveals the mindset that they killed James with the sword, reveals the mindset toward the Lord's church at the time. They looked at them as deceivers. And then from verse 3, we see that the murder of James pleased the people. They took delight in it, which manifests the hatred, the malice, that the hatred and the malice was widespread, going beyond the government. It went beyond King Herod. It went to the people. There was this mindset of hatred and malice. It was also a time of sorrow and heartache. Again, verse 2, and he killed James, the brother of John, with the sword. Now, James was one of the inner three, along with Peter and John. So, the murder of James, no doubt, was a tremendous loss to the church. And it was a source of great sorrow and heartache. It may have been, I'm sure it was, a time of anger. They've killed James. No doubt it was a time when emotions were very high in the church. It was also a time of threat and danger. Following the murder of James, we read that Peter, now again, Peter was another of the inner three. He was arrested and he was put in prison. And we see he's under the guard of 16 soldiers. So here's the scene. James has been murdered. Peter is in prison, basically on death row, awaiting execution. Herod's intention was to kill Peter. The church at this time, they're like a lamb in the midst of furious wolves. It was a very troublesome time, a very disturbing time. Time of great difficulty, a time of great distress. It was a threatening time for the Lord's church. They might be thinking, where's the killing going to stop? They've killed James. They're going to kill Peter. Is John next? Who's next? Where's it going to stop? It was a time of uncertainty. It was a time of fear. They're under attack. Everything seems to be falling apart. It was a time of seeming impossibility. The truth is, their faith was being put to the test. So what did they do? We read in verse 5, Peter was kept in prison. Following that statement, we have a difference-making word, but. But. Conveying the idea of nevertheless, or however. And then notice what it says. Prayer was made without ceasing of the church of God, of the church unto God for him. That was a response. The church banded together in prayer. We read in verse 12 that in the house of a woman named Mary, this is where the prayer was taking place, many were gathered together praying. So the purpose of the gathering was not to plan. What are we going to do next? What are we going to do about this? The purpose of the gathering was to pray. They didn't meet at Mary's house in an attempt to come up with some kind of plan to free Peter. They didn't meet at Mary's house to write letters to the authorities. They met to pray for Peter. They didn't meet at Mary's house to plan a revolution. They met to pray. Over here is Peter chained in prison. He's in maximum security. He's awaiting death. And over here, there's a people praying. On one side, Herod, representing the power of the world, the government. And on the other side, many are gathered together praying. The church's impulse, the church's instinct was to pray. They did that which was normal for them to do. Oh, it's not normal for most, but it was normal for them to gather together and pray. I want to tell you something. You can say, well, I'll tell you what, I'm going to write my senator. You go right ahead. But you'll get further praying. You'll get further praying. That senator's probably not going to read your letter. His secretary is, and she's probably going to toss in the garbage. God will hear. God will hear. So their impulse is to pray. They're gathered, they're banded together with burdened hearts, praying. Again, verse 12, many were gathered together. They came from various points of destination to one point of destination, to pray. That's why they're there, to pray. They were moved to pray. Oh, that we would be moved to pray. Whatever else was going on in their lives, and like anybody else, things were going on in their lives, they were gathered together praying. They felt a need to pray. They didn't throw up their hands in despair. They gathered to pray. Their focal point was God. Notice verse 5. Prayer was made unto God. Prayer was made unto God. There was an awareness of God. Prayer was made unto God. They were drawn to God. Prayer was made unto God. They were looking to God. Unto God. They had taken their proper place before God. They realized their weakness. They realized their ignorance. They realized their need. And they realized His sovereignty, His greatness, His authority, His power, His ownership, and they prayed unto God. They believed and trusted God. There was a personal persuasion. There was a personal assurance and conviction in the fact that He is an able God. So they prayed unto God. They believed, they were persuaded that He's righteous, He's gracious, He's merciful, He's faithful, He's loving, He's caring, He's a sustaining God, He's an on-time God. So they prayed unto God. Prayer was made unto God. They sought God. They're seeking His help. They're seeking His power. They're seeking His intervention. They're seeking for a manifestation of God. Prayer was made unto God. There was communion and fellowship and contact with God. They knew their sufficiency was in God, so they talked to Him. They knew that He was the one who knew exactly where Peter was located in that prison, so they talked to Him. They knew that he was the one who had the heart of Herod in his hands, and he was the one who could turn it whithersoever he would. So they talked to him. That makes sense, doesn't it? So they talked to him. They knew the one who was the controller and sustainer of all. The one greater than the king. The one greater than the king's army. The one greater than the prison walls. The one greater than the chains. The one greater than the iron gates. So they talked to him. Makes good sense. They knew the one who could bypass all security of that prison. So they talked to him. They knew the one who did not need to check in at the front gate or to be cleared by a warden. So they just talked to him. They knew the one who could show up anywhere in that prison whenever he pleased. So they talked to him. Well, people today, they think they're so advanced, think they're so intelligent, but they don't even have the intelligence to talk to the one who can. They talked to him. They knew the one who was greater than that prison, greater than the iron gates. So they talked to him. They cast themselves upon him. They're leaning upon him. They're drawing from him because they knew him. I'm afraid many times we forget who we know. We forget who we know. We forget who we know. They prayed fervently. It says prayer was made without ceasing. Prayer was the business at hand. Their hearts were so burdened that they prayed without ceasing. They brought their burden, they brought their problem, their difficulty, their need to the Lord. And they did so without ceasing. That is, they just kept on. They just kept on. They prayed for God's intervention and did so without ceasing. In the midst of apparent doom and gloom, they prayed. And they did so without ceasing. Those words, without ceasing, convey the idea of that which is intense. They're very passionate. There was desire, there was energy in their praying. They prayed, and then they prayed some more. And then they prayed some more. And then they prayed some more. They prayed without ceasing. They were unified in their praying. Verse 5, prayer was made of the church. And in verse 12, gathered together, praying. They at one and at the same time in the same place, all at once, were praying. That's what they were there for. They were jointly praying. They were banded together praying. They were in harmony. They were in agreement. And they were praying. They were in harmony of felt need. There was a harmony of feeling. They were all feeling the same thing. And there was a harmony of desire. They all wanted the same thing. So they committed to praying. They were not merely together, but they were together praying. Notice those words there in verse 12. Together praying. Not just together, but together praying. I want you to notice that they prayed specifically. Notice what it says. Peter was kept in prison, but prayer was made unto God for him. For him. They're banded together in a common cause to pray for Peter. To pray for Peter. Peter's in prison. He's on death row. But that night, at the house of Mary, the church had assembled to put Peter's case into God's hands. They were not just praying in generalities. They were pleading with the Lord on behalf of Peter. Their hearts are heavy. Their hearts are burdened. They have love. They have concern for Peter. And they prayed for Peter. Listen to them as they pray. Lord, watch over Peter. Lord, help Peter. Lord, give Peter grace. Protect Peter. Lord, James is dead. And now they're going to kill Peter. Oh, Lord, intervene. Prevent Peter from being killed. Lord, there's nothing we can do. We plead with Thee to work a miracle. They're praying. And then they prayed some more. And then they prayed some more. Now consider what God was doing while they were praying. What God was doing while they were praying, they were unaware of. They did not know. What God was doing, again, serves as a reminder. He is able to do exceeding abundantly above all that we ask or think. So keep on praying. Keep on praying. Well, I don't see anything happening. They didn't either. They had no idea what God was doing while they were praying. And you don't either. We don't either. Well, I've prayed for weeks and nothing's happened. You don't know that. You don't know that. You don't know what God's doing. So keep on praying. So keep on praying. Often we quit praying because we don't see God working. No one in that house that night that was praying could see what God was doing down at the prison. But they didn't just assume He's not doing anything. Must not be His will. We'll stop. You don't know what God may be doing out of our sight. So keep praying. So let's look at what God was doing. In verse 6, there's an amazing statement. Peter was sleeping. That's amazing. Peter was sleeping. He'd been arrested, thrown into prison. The order of execution has been signed. The date has been set. Peter was to die. He was chained to two soldiers, and Peter's sleeping. He was well guarded. The iron gates of Herod's prison had clanged shut. And what was Peter doing that night? Peter was sleeping. I believe that's the work of God. Considering the circumstances, that was the work of God. The church was on its knees. Prayer was ascending up for Peter. And unbeknownst to the church, the peace of God that passeth understanding came upon Peter. I believe they were praying, Lord, help Peter, encourage Peter, give Peter grace. And Peter was sleeping. God was answering their prayer. Did they know Peter was asleep? No. They didn't know. They didn't know. All right, here's what I picture. They chained Peter to these two soldiers. Peter looked at him and said good night and went to sleep. You do not know what God is doing behind the scenes. So you just keep on praying. Verse 7, and behold, the angel of the Lord came upon him. The prison walls, the prison gates, the locks, the guards were no barrier to the Lord. He came right into that prison and did as he pleased. And he did so without 16 soldiers on guard knowing a thing about it. That's a miracle. God is able. Pray. God is able. Keep on praying. That's the lesson we have here. Well, I don't see that God's doing anything. You don't see a lot of things God's doing. You don't see most things that God's doing. You just see a very small part. Keep praying. You don't know. Verse 7, and a light shined in the prison without the guards knowing it. Without the guards knowing a thing about it. A light shined in the prison. God is working. It's a miraculous work of God. God is able. Pray. God is able. Keep on praying. Don't stop. Verse 7 also. And he smote Peter on the side and raised him up. I believe Peter's now in a sitting position. The Lord nudged Peter on the side. Which side? I don't know. But I do know this, that one of the soldiers was on that side. And he woke Peter, he stirred Peter, without those guards knowing a thing about it. That's miraculous. Unbeknown to those who were gathered together praying for Peter, God was working miracles that very hour within those prison walls. You don't know what God is doing. You may be praying for somebody. And you say, well, I haven't seen any change in months. You don't know what God's doing. Keep on praying. You may be praying about a certain event, certain circumstances. Well, nothing seems to be happening. I'm just going to stop. Don't do that. Unless God tells you to stop. You keep on praying because you don't know what God's doing. And then notice verse 7, saying, arise up quickly. Only Peter heard that voice. The guards didn't hear it. The light's shining in the prison. They're unaware of it. And notice the angel of the Lord did not say. Notice what he said, arise up quickly. Again, I believe he nudged Peter. Peter's in a sitting position. Now he says, Peter, stand up. Rise quickly. He did not say, Peter, you need to get up, but get up very slowly. Peter, get up very quietly. Get up very carefully. We don't want to wake the guards. That's not what he said. He said, arise up quickly. Peter stood upright without two guards chained to him, knowing a thing about it. This is miraculous. Unbeknownst to those who were gathered together praying for Peter, God's working miracles at that very hour within those prison walls. You don't know what God's doing. Pray. Keep on praying. Then notice verse 7 again. There's a lot going on here. And his chains fell off from his hands. Peter's standing, those chains fall off his hands. They made some noise when they hit the floor. That prison wasn't carpeted. They made some noise. And the guards did not know a thing about it. Unbeknownst to those who were gathered together praying for Peter, the great emancipator was doing his liberating work behind those prison walls. They didn't know anything about it. Peter did not leave that prison with clanking chains. God removed the chains. He's able to do exceeding abundantly above all that we ask. So keep on praying. Notice verse 8. And the angel said unto him, he gives him some instruction. Gird thyself. Peter, get dressed. Didn't say anything about being quiet. Peter, get dressed. Follow me. Notice what else it says. Bind on thy sandals. So what he's saying is, Peter, put on your shoes. But he said more than that. He didn't just say, Peter, put on your sandals. He said, Peter, bind thy sandals. So that's like saying to you and I, put on your shoes and make sure you tie them. Make sure you tie them. Guards don't know a thing about it. The church doesn't know a thing about it. This is miraculous. So now Peter is dressed. He has his shoes on. And then there's more instruction. And he said unto him, cast thy garment, thy coat, about thee, and follow me. And he went out and followed him. Notice verse 10. When they were past the first and the second ward, so down the corridors they go, past the cells, through the security wards to the main gate of the prison. And they stand before the bolted iron gate. And you read verse 10, and the bolts slid back, the lock turned itself, and the iron gate swung open. God is working. miracles within those prison walls. And Peter walked out. No one in the prison knew a thing about it. No one in Mary's house who were gathered praying knew what God was doing. They just kept on praying. And that's what we're to do. Still following the angel, he walks the length of the street, and forthwith the angel departed from him. Peter comes to realize that this is not a dream, but a reality. And he says in verse 11, "Now I know of a surety that the Lord hath sent his angel and hath delivered or rescued or released me out of the hand of Herod and from all the expectation of the people of the Jews." The people were eagerly awaiting Peter's execution. But God. But God. God did a work. And there is a God who reigns over all. And He's able. Keep on praying. Well, I don't see that God's doing any. Keep on praying. God doesn't have to show you what He's doing. God doesn't have to inform you what He's doing. You just keep on praying. You don't know. You have no idea what God's doing. In verses 12 through 17, Peter makes his way to the house of Mary. And when they saw him, and what did they see? All is well. All is well. They were astonished. You would be too. You would be too. They were astonished. The miracle of God was standing right before them. And they were stunned. They were awestruck. Again, our God is able to do exceeding abundantly above all that we ask or think. Pray. That needs to be our response. Pray. We have many things to pray for. The list is endless. We do not know what God may be doing out of our sight, out of our knowledge. But we do know this. He's able to do exceeding abundantly above all that we ask or think. So keep on praying. Keep on praying. Don't stop. Keep praying. Keep praying. Now, if you're praying for somebody that's dying, and you're praying that the Lord spare their life, and they die, okay, it's time to stop praying for that. It's obvious. But until it's obvious, you keep on praying. We have this terrible habit. It's like we can only pray so long, and, it's like we've got God on a time schedule. Lord, if you don't answer in a week, then it's not your will. Really, you have the right to determine that? No, you don't. Just keep on praying. Just keep on praying. So we find here great encouragement to relentless praying. Brother Dave, if you'd come and lead us in verse song. Let's all stand.